This episode is brought to you by Sunrise Banks and Lifetime. Welcome to another episode of BTT Discussions. I'm your host, Mike J., founder and CEO of Black Tech Talent. Today, we have a very special guest on the show, Yasmin. She is the co-founder and general partner of Visible Hands VC, and we welcome you to the show. How are you doing?
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming. So, I want to kind of talk about your journey and kind of, have you introduce yourself and where you're at today. And then we'll kind of jump back and go through how you got there. A lot of our listeners love to, be inspired by, seeing people that look like them, just climb up the ranks. And we all have such different stories, right? Some people do have the kind of rags to riches story. Some people were already middle class, upper middle class, and they still had to figure out and have their own challenges to get to where they are. And that's what's beautiful about this show and just about our cultures is that it's not monolithic, right? Like we all have a different journey, but there's still those similarities in the struggles that we go through to get to where we are. So why don't you just start off with kind of talking about the company you have and your title and just kind of introduce yourself that way.
Yeah, well, I have two co-founders and general partners alongside me. We have started a VC firm that's Black and Latinx owned. We invest, Visible Hands exists to be an iconic and inclusive fund to invest in exceptional, underrepresented founders building high growth companies, technology companies. We exclusively invest in women and people of color. We built this fund to invest at the pre-seed and seed stage. We believe that institutional barriers begin at day zero. Women and people make up 70% of the population and have the stats on access to venture has gone from bad and dismal at 2%. If you're looking at women-owned tech companies to 1 or 1%, POC, and those stats are down 80% in this environment and are getting worse. We started this firm from different angles of being in this space. One of my co-founders, Justin, is a company builder. He is obsessed with what I call just creating value as a startup founder, has no interest in being limited partner facing, which is what I do. I have another co-founder, Daniel Achimpong, and he came from the growth equity space and just saw a lack of access to capital at the check size that his firm was writing. And then I came at this from a public equities background and then on to being the head of growth and strategy for a firm that invests for families, up to 5 generations of wealth in many cases, and some endowments and foundations, which gave me family context and asset allocation across different asset classes. What venture fund investing looks like for that LP base.
Awesome. That's great. And I saw that there's some training or programming along with your fund, correct? Before doing investments. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, what we saw was a lot of venture firms say that they're founder friendly and that, they build a platform and a community for founders. And we realized that it's so much more than a check that's needed. A check is needed. Let's be clear, right? You can't out-train someone to build a business that's high growth, right? Like then you need the capital, but it is so lonely and there's so much, banging your head against the wall that has to happen at the earliest stages that there's a dynamic that needs to be peer to peer, right?
Mm,
Like you need to feel like you are, there's some things that you can't say to your investors. There's some things you can't say to strategic advisors that you can only say to other founders. Very early on, we wanted to be able to create community and almost create the conditions for founders to be successful. And we knew that the peer to peer part of it would be just one of our secret sauce ingredients. So it's not training per se. We invest in founders who are visionary, who can execute the damn thing, and who just need the right support and need customized partners, like customized support. We don't offer, classes on a term sheet. Like if you have a term sheet and you want to talk to someone, you want to talk to some lawyers, then we can be helpful there. But we don't have sort of, here's a curriculum. So I think what makes us different is we provide very customized support, a 30, 60, 90-day plan, and a network, right? Like just access to who's the plug for this? Who can I get a few perspectives on something? And what's interesting is the way that we do things has a lot to do with providing branding support and providing fundraising access, and less to do with teaching a course.
awesome. Awesome. I love it. Because I've seen some, funds and fund owners kind of start, boot camps and accelerators and things of that nature. And a lot of times that doesn't even, come with the funding or guarantee any type of funding. And sometimes those programs don't even really prepare you for investment, right? Or offer that network that you actually need. And so they become more kind of like funnels, right? For like deal flow and stuff like that.
Right.
But you don't know that you're in it, not actually building a genuine like relationship and, getting those specific resources that you need. So I love that approach to it. So we're going to talk more about that, a little bit later in the interview, but I
Okay.
want to jump back into your story on, what brought you to this space as far as believing that you could do it. And like, what are some of the elements that were, in your life that kind of, made you believe in yourself as a woman of color and somebody who's kind of climbed the corporate ladder and brought yourself to this position. What was those early upbringings that kind of motivated you to get to where you are?
Yeah. I would say that my story is probably one that when people meet me at this stage in my life, don't have an appreciation for. My mother came to the States at 15 from El Salvador, and my grandmother had been here as a nanny in a suburb of Massachusetts called Milton as an au pair to a family that had 11 kids. My grandmother doesn't even like kids. I mean, that was a real sacrifice for her,
Yeah.
um, to be a nanny to 11 kids. And it took quite a few years for my grandmother to go and send for my mother and my uncle. And my mother, coming to this country at 15 is a really awkward time when you don't know the language. And for many, I'm so grateful for the sacrifices that both my grandmother and my mother made, because I feel like it really created the resiliency factor that, I'm ready to run through a brick wall because I can't even imagine some of the stress and anxiety that they face on a daily basis. So I would say that was part of what set me on my path. My grandmother really raised me because my mother had me fairly young. My biological father suffers from addiction. and wasn't really around. I have my man who helped raise me, and a debt of gratitude for him, being a dad for me, starting when I was 10 years old. And really, it was my mother focusing on going to nonprofits to kind of help create access for me around education, and also exposing me to a completely different world. By the time I had finished high school, I went to a prep school in New England that was also a boarding school, partly because of the decisions that my parents made. And I did know what venture capital was. My very first internship coming out of school was in venture capital. So I did have exposure in that way. A lot of what made me believe that I could walk into spaces that I knew were systematically not designed for me was some of that exposure and being in school with, kind of like the power structure, and knowing that, a lot of their challenges and insecurities are the same challenges that I have too. And being able to, at a formative age, show up and have a voice and have it counted. And I think, starting very early, that exposure helped me feel like, why don't I deserve a seat at this table? A lot of what we need to do is break the status quo that you have, precedents that you set. So you actually need my perspective
Right.
to change the game, right? And a lot of what I've realized is, even in these structures, there's kind of like a few motivating factors, not to be philosophical, but people can be afraid of the structures that their children are going to walk into and want to see that change. Whether it's, I have a daughter and I want to give her my company, right? And I want her to be taken serious, whatever the motivation may be. Others, it's from a market forces perspective. There's an abundance and maybe of opportunity set that's not being tapped into, and I want to tap into that. So like seeking maybe more of greed. And then I think there's a third one that people don't talk enough about, which is pride. Like, what is my legacy going to be as a human? And so I've been able to, I think, be in, code switch the hell out of my life since I was 15, and I think a lot of what people may see can be some polished now, but they have no idea that, I was raised by a grandmother and a single mom with a dad who wasn't even present when I was born because he was out partying, quote unquote.
Right, right. And that's it's like I said in the beginning, it's that's why we love hearing everybody's story, because it's so different, but there are those similarities. Like you said, you were exposed to VC early, in your career. However, you went through all these things, and your family went through all these things to get you to where you are. One thing that you said that was interesting that I think translates for what you're doing now as well is like the story of your grandmother, right? Like she came here, she learned the lay of the land, she became a au pair for, was 11 kids, and and didn't even like kids, right? And that speaks to doing what you have to do to get to where you want to be, right? And you talked about, just pride and the legacy you want to create, and you're part of that legacy that your grandmother and your mother sacrificed to get you to a point. And now you're here giving other people those opportunities along with your partners to then create that legacy for themselves and their families. And so what I think is interesting in the kind of the conversations that only people like us can have is when you're looking for founders, looking at that resilience, looking at the ability to multitask and to overcome obstacles, right? We hear a lot of investors talk about like, oh, we invest in founders, right? But like, what does that actually mean, right? because at the end of the day, we know some of the, systemic racism, we know some of these obstacles. So you can have a founder of color who actually checks all the boxes for pre-seed, seed funding, but they're just like, oh, you're not investable, or, this isn't going to work, or we don't think this is going to go far. And one thing they're most likely not accounting for is the fact that this founder has probably overcome a lot of obstacles and is built to withstand, pressure and obstacles. Is probably going to be, because of, possible imposter syndrome, is probably going to be overly honest and transparent with you to make sure they're building those good relationships, right?
Don't we do that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we do. So, in your journey, as a investor, do you calculate those things as a plus, whereas certain other funds may calculate those things as a negative, right? They may look at it as, well, you've never had a large amount of money, you don't come from a family that has a high level of financial literacy or institutional education and these type of things, where it's more advantageous for us to know this person's a hustler, they're going to get it done one way or another. As long as we have a little guidance and some capital, we know this can move forward.
Yeah, I've always really prioritized resiliency, scrappiness in founders as a for real criteria for my mental model and framework for who I should have conviction in. This, for example, is a market where being battle tested, right? Mm-hmm. Being able to be resource magnetic when there's, you're walking by faith and not by sight in terms of the resources that are becoming available to you is critical, right? Like these are the environments founders that can build now can build in any economic climate. And that is something that should not be undervalued when you're looking at a founder. For me at pre-seed, so I want to see you build in a 10-year construct, likely. So there's going to be a whole market cycle plus some. So you're by definition of market cycles going to be building in different environments.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because I've seen, like, for instance, with Black Tech Talent, we started during the pandemic, started during the global civil rights movement. We're based out of Minnesota. I knew George Floyd. So we had all those obstacles in the way. We bootstrapped it up until essentially October of last year. So we're still under 3 years. We had revenue coming in after 2 weeks. And now we're in a recession, right? And so, we're battle tested, and we've gone through, just in this project, what it takes to actually reiterate over and over again, to have a solid plan, to build community around the things that we've done. But myself as a founder in general have always gone through different obstacles and figured out things. And that's why I was able to put all of that into this and build something during that time. And now, even with the recession, of course, that affects everyone. And we have, corporate clients that are hiring or not hiring. So it does affect us in that way. But because of my previous experiences and challenges, I've been able to essentially navigate that and build the company in a way where, like I said, that stuff affects us, but it doesn't stop the show, right? We didn't build it to be dependent on kind of one factor in the economy, because we built it during a time when the economy was bad, right? And so, but as a Black founder, we'll still, see people having doubt in what we're building, or trying to extract our secret sauce so they can put it somewhere else and kind of disregard the actual magic that we've created in a small amount of time. We've produced 2 summits. We've produced 2 technology fairs that we call the Community Tech Fest, created a superhero you see behind me, Black Circuit, who exists in both real life and digitally. So we have an actual costume. He shows up to events. But we also have a metaverse platform we rolled out with him, and AR activations to get the youth in STEM. Over 7,000 members around the world. And I think we're at 7, 8 awards. I got 40 under 40 last year. So we've achieved, a lot of stuff in a small amount of time. Like I said, bootstrap basically until October and just raised a little bit of working capital. And there's still doubters and haters, right? And just yesterday, I was tagged in this thread for another 40 under 40 I got via a podcast, and they were having the conversation of like founders having to be kind of resilient to the perception of failure when people are putting that on them. And the catalyst for that conversation was the SpaceX rocket that exploded, right? And they were like, was that a failure, or were they just testing it? It didn't work, but now they have more data and more information and know how to approach it, the next time. And so they're like, I wonder how founders feel when they're testing things publicly and they don't necessarily work out, and then it's viewed as a failure. And I was just like, yeah, we get it from both angles, because you have the haters, right? So you'll have the investors who passed, and then if something fails or doesn't launch when you thought you were going to launch it, they're like, yep, good thing I didn't invest, right? Competition, people who are like scared or worried you're going to be competition, something doesn't work, and they're like, yep, see, we knew we were better than. So you have all that outside, right? The people who didn't want to support, but then you also have on the positive side the people that you do want to impress, the people that did believe, the people that did invest, that you want to impress and kind of make sure that things work out. And so it does become difficult to do certain things in the public eye that can be perceived as a failure, even if it's just testing it or trying to adjust and tweak. So I think as people of color as well, with that imposter syndrome thing, it can become hard to, source public opinion and accept feedback and stuff like that, because we're afraid of testing things out publicly. So how do you look at it, when you're, dealing with founders you've already invested in, and they're going through those things and they want to or don't want to kind of approach you with some of those struggles?
Yeah, I mean, real talk, I can't deny that it's a bloodbath out here, right?
Yeah.
Like there could be a definition of 2023 where just surviving was actually thriving,
Yeah.
because so few can survive that it is actually a slow clap accomplishment, right? So that absolutely needs to be said. I will say that, as an investor, I've had my heart and mind broken. Like, it's hard to fathom why this is not working out for a founder I have so much conviction in, or for a management team that I have so much conviction in. And to make that hard decision, I don't envy a founder when they decide that for so many reasons, whether it's a cash cliff or whether it's, and it's not a burn rate thing, maybe it's a timing thing, maybe it's a cap thing, maybe it's a true lack of product market fit, to make that hard decision and end the dream. Like, you've had your whole family sacrificing time, money, whatever, sweat into this with you. You are seeing the impossible, and now you have to pivot. It's a really tough decision. And I think there are founders making this decision every hour of every day in this environment, especially those that are exposed to, I would say on the consumer side, marketing and what's happening there, and CAC, right? And just not being able to acquire customers quick enough or in an affordable manner. So let's just have a moment for where we are right now. At the same time, it's, I think you can be optimistic that those that are able to bring resources and a team in this moment, that people are there for like the real mission and the dream, right?
Yeah,
You're finding your tribe, which is so important because everyone has had to reset their expectations in this environment.
definitely, definitely. And like I said, I think a lot of times for us, we don't get the benefit of that reality of like, we're really going through, uh obstacles and odds that are
Right.
against us, even when everything's going well,
Right.
right? And when they're not, then it becomes even crazier. And so when we do overcome those things, it's still almost like yeah, it's cool, but like, what else? Like, why
Yeah.
should we invest in you? So that's another reason why, what you and your partners are doing is so important, because you have that perspective of the business side, but also the humane side, because the humane side is what's going to ultimately drive the business side when you know what people are going through and know how to navigate that with them.
Yeah. And I mean, I think one of the things you look for in a founder is an ability to make a tough decision. And I have some data points on founders who are genuinely able to make a tough decision. And I want to invest in their next big thing, right? I
Mhm.
think the more funders like myself and my team that exist, then we get to participate in what others have participated in for centuries, which is failure composting. Like, oh, yeah, I can shrug off this L because now I know more. Before it was like, well, you felt like you had the weight of having to prove yourself and you have one shot and that's it. I think for me, we are still really investing in the founder, right? And their ability to execute, make tough decisions, assess the market and their business. And there are founders, when they make a tough decision about closing down a business, I want to be the first person you call when you're building your next thing. One of the things when you are winding down a business that I am still watching as an investor is take time and space, but the quality of your reflections
Yeah.
about what happened. It's like dating, right? Like you it's the same thing. It's like when you marry someone, you hope that they have thought about what happened and why those relationships didn't work so that when you get to hopefully a great healthy relationship, you can bring in those lessons. I'm doing the same thing. Like I always tell founders, when you're ready, when you've had space and time to heal, please write down your reflections. And that to me is a sign of like, okay, I'm already seeing if I want to invest in your next thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's awesome. I know my listeners are going to enjoy hearing that, because that's another thing. Like I said, just, it's already difficult to make those decisions and feel like a failure, or feel like you did do your best and it just didn't work, which is also tough. But to know that there are, investors out there who are like, no, I want to be a part of that journey too. Like, keep me updated when you got something else going on, or let's talk. So I think that's a great approach as well. So one thing that, we're talking about in general that I want to dive into is what makes an underrepresented founder, right? And I'm asking that in the sense of, my audience, my part of the audience that are, white, heterosexual, male dominated VC funds or angel investors and things of that nature, that I'm sure are hearing this and they're being bombarded with it. And they're like, well, what makes somebody underrepresented? This is just business. If the idea is good and the person's a good person, we'll invest. And we know that's not true a lot of the times, right? So from your perspective, like, what makes somebody underrepresented outside of just ethnicity?
Yeah. I think, well, I'm sensing kind of like two parts to it, which is, what makes someone who's underrepresented, like, is there an investment rationale and like, is there a wedge there? Like, is there some sort of investment strategy that could build I can build off of because they're underrepresented? I can tell you how we literally define being underrepresented is someone who self-identifies. Did I say you identify? Right,
Right.
because you can check a box and not identify as that, as a woman or a person of color. And for that, anyone who is not represented in tech. So white, male, Asian men are over disproportionate to the population size in tech.
Mm.
Um, and anyone else who vis-a-vis the size of the population in this country is not represented in tech, that's who we invest in. That's our definition. I think there are other ways to think about it too. I think it's we want that for sure. It's 70% of the population, right? Our portfolio, we've made 93 investments. It's over 70% Black and Latinx and over 60% women who we've invested in. So that's literally from a definition perspective, how we
Mhm.
look at it. So for these groups, so for us, it's a gender and a racial identification aspect. I'm really excited about the future and frontier tech and AI because I think it's bringing a new angle of why bringing these groups to the table, why that matters. Because we're talking about large language models and data training. And
Mhm.
this is an opportunity to make sure that we're not building models that are built with bias. And the chaos and the consequences that we could be setting ourselves up for if we're building inherently biased data, right?
Yep.
So data sets. So I think that's another example of, oh, not only do I care about the potential that's not being brought to bear for so many different reasons in the tech complex, like why does that matter? But we need their perspective too. I think so far the rationale has been, oh, we need to unlock consumer GDP and build out markets that otherwise, you know, they may exist, but they may exist in other contexts,
Mhm.
but convert them like the bank, like they're still moving money, but they can move money in a more formal context. But I think what I'm excited about in this conversation is it's not just that we make money, we can buy your things. Yes, we can buy your things, but you also have a tech construction of why we could be moving in a more problematic direction. And it's not coming from a perspective of, only 2% or only conversations. I think especially for people who don't identify in that only category, I'm asking you to have so much empathy that you may not necessarily have. I think this is a new conversation with AI moving into the mainstream that we does not require as much mental plasticity and is not just about how we spend our money. It's about how we engage with technology.
Yeah, super important. And that's why with, Black Tech Talent, we focused on the pipeline, right? We focused on actually building community because it's about getting people into these different opportunities at bigger companies, right? But it's also about us recognizing each other's genius, fostering the
Right.
next generation, and for us to also have that data. So we started putting out surveys and doing our own reports. And I remember early on, we had a company reach out and they were doing facial recognition technology. And they reached out and they were like, hey, we love what you're doing. The Black community is the hardest to tap into. We would love to, work with you, blah, blah. Sent them a price, never heard back from them again. So P, you have companies that are building facial recognition and doing things in AI and all these platforms. And not only are they not tapping into the Black and brown communities, but they also, when given a chance to do it, they don't want to pay. They don't see the financial value in adding that to what they're doing. And so that's a big problem too. And that goes back to those mindsets, right? We've seen I remember when Microsoft first rolled out their AI chatbot on Twitter, and it became racist in like less than a day, right?
Right.
Racist, sexist, all these things.
At their demo day with reporters, right? So
Yeah.
like there's a case in point of maybe you should have invested in who's who's at the table building this product, right? And if that group maybe looked different or thought about the data set in a different way, like building that large language model, maybe the result would have been different on your press day.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So with that said, I want to talk about some of the things you are excited about in technology. You mentioned like what things can do as far as inclusivity when it comes to AI and stuff like that. But what are some things just in general that like you're excited about that you've been, researching or that has been proposed to you?
Well, I will say that we've been investing in AI before it was cute.
Mhm.
Uh, and we're generalists. And so we invest at the earliest stage, and not to a particular thesis in terms of sector specific. From the what I've been following up until this point in my coverage is family tech and fintech. And that's a lot of how we learn in our organization in terms of our coverage. But in terms of what I am interested in right now, is definitely inclusive of more frontier tech.
Nice. And can you go into family tech a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we have a portfolio company where the founder is building a calendaring system, and it has a hardware component as well. And it's essentially organization for a family with a device. It's called Herc Display. That's one of, trying to solve how, in many cases, it's been women who have the responsibility of figuring out how to get all of this on a Google Calendar and how to get you to make sure that you're going to your doctor's appointment and XYZ. And it's a real, like the amount of hours that are unpaid for parents doing this labor, it can be up to 11 hours. And when I think about myself, I didn't have 11 hours before I had my daughter. Um, like I was already working late and on the weekends. And so now introducing 11 hours, I didn't have, like, I definitely personally resonate with the problem that they're solving and creating efficiency and time management. So that's an example of a company that is solving problems for families. We have a company actually that received press called Let's Get Set. And this company helps working mothers better understand their taxes. And there's the amount of unrealized like tax dollars available to especially parents when you have kids. It's usually something that is not well understood. I mean, people don't really understand how the IRS works and how tax laws change. And this company is helping parents access $7,000 in refunds, which can be, especially for working families, like of the largest, like, you know, increase in their bank account and liquidity at
Yeah.
one time. And that's taking advantage of earned income tax credit and child tax credit and child care tax credit that's not well understood. So that's an example of another business that has somewhat of a fintech angle. but is supporting families.
Nice. I love it. I love it. So, we talked about, founders overcoming obstacles, just people in general, right? And so now with us being in the recession, and we've talked about it kind of from the founder angle, but from a VC angle, how is that looking to you? Are you doubling down on investments because founders need it? Are you slowing up on investments? Are you steady? And what are kind of some of the things that you may be doing to kind of um what's the word I want to use? Not really pivot, but just kind of like uh, you know, monitor how the economy is going versus like what you're doing as a business.
Yeah, I think we have a good amount of investment um, that, I would say in terms of they're been able to raise rounds beyond the stage at which we've invested in, who are very well positioned to manage this environment. And I really sometimes I forget because I invest for the long term that, for example, my LPs and others have short term um, ism, right?
Mhm.
That's kind of at their forefront of what they're thinking about because I mean, we're investing in founders with, fundamentally durable businesses. And for the founders who are thinking about, okay, in this environment, what revenue stream can I lean into to buy myself more time?
Mhm.
And how can I think about my margin in a more productive way so that, I'm managing on the expense side and can weather this storm for longer? So I think um, I'm really excited about, in particular, the crop of founders coming up right now, for reasons we talked about in the beginning. And I think there's absolutely things that you can do as a founder and working with your advisors and your investors to buy yourself more time, as we're all kind of driving through the rain right now. But hopefully you got a good co-pilot and your investors are people who are truly your tribe, who you can, call them and say real talk, right? Like
Right.
I am so bogged down with surviving. I don't know how to be innovative, right? Like there is innovation seems luxurious, right? Like help me get through the next 3 months because I'm trying to figure out when I should raise. Am I going to be able to raise on these traction metrics? Like how many VCs are actually writing checks right now? Like you have VC firms that in the last 3 quarters have only written 5 checks, but have met with thousands of founders. Like it is, you absolutely will be doing many more meetings and experiencing more no's. Like if you're a founder not experiencing a no on a daily basis, you're so fortunate
Yeah.
because this is like I said, we'll all look back at this moment following, the heyday of COVID and say, wow, that was a time. What a time to be alive.
Yeah.
um, and, like I said, and we did it. So I really think that, with the right investors and advisors, you can, if some of it is timing, like I also said, this could be a time to make a tough decision, but I also think you're going to make it too with the right people around you.
Definitely, definitely. So, we met in DC,
Yes, you did.
to uh go meet with some members of the US Senate, Capitol Hill. And that was an interesting experience. So that was my second time ever in DC, but that was my first time as an adult and in an official capacity. And so really enjoyed it. I remember not knowing much of what to expect. Got hit up with the opportunity. They're like, Amy Klobuchar is, one of your senators, and so we
You're a
want
senator. Yep.
like represent. And I'm like, cool. So I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna go out there and like say some fly stuff. I'm like taking notes and like, what can we, really do to have an impact and hopefully build a relationship. And then I'm there and I'm kind of just, by myself running around exploring the first day, go relax, think of some more stuff to say. I come down, I see you, I see a few others, we chop it up. And then we have this dinner, and then it was like all of a sudden it just felt like there was a lot of pressure on me to like come up with certain things and like drive certain conversation because Amy was gonna be there and she
Right.
was there. And so that kind of changed my perspective of the trip as well. What was your experience with that, and how do you feel about kind of the follow up from that conversation as well?
It was an eye-opening experience. I have done something I call my West Wing episode, where I did a brief stint in political fundraising, and we did go to DC together. Um, I, yeah, I would say um, it was eye-opening because we had an opportunity to engage with the staffers also before
Mhm.
of your home senator, and mine was Markey and his office, in addition to the staffers of the senators who we had the roundtable with. And one of the things that I learned, engaging with the principal and the senator is one thing, but a
Yeah.
lot of the way I actually judge politicians is like how you treat your staff and the quality and the experience and knowledge of your staff, because they're the ones who aren't the celebrities, they're the ones who help them do the work. And it was just interesting to see, not across the board, but in many cases the staffers were incredibly young
Yeah.
and don't have relevant experience in these arenas that they're helping to craft legislation around, and for me, there's such a practical and pragmatic knowledge gap missing in implementing some of these some of these laws and how these agencies engage with capital markets.
Hmm.
And I mean, it is absolutely work that should not necessarily be tied to those who can give the most money, to campaigns on how to make these policies and laws relevant and resonant. I mean, we had a lot of people in our roundtable who have been waiting for $3 million from the government for multiple years. And if you have a great program, but cash, especially in an environment like now, I've
Yeah.
got my accountants see I've got a receivable for $3 million for 3 years. It's like the government, you don't want the government actually helping to put people out of business when their actual intention is to keep you in business because it's taken them 3 years to make a payment, right? So I think if you say that to a staffer, that do you know that in practice, the average time is taking the government to pay these CEOs in this room is 24 months. And we operate in a world where my bills come monthly,
Yeah.
and Peter and Paul are about to show up and you are going to be Johnny come lately. Like
Yeah.
that is really important for staffers to understand. And I don't know that the way that, staffers make nearly nothing to live in DC, which is not free, to work all day and all night and on the weekend, and to also weigh in on how government and businesses in different sectors engage. It just seemed like we need to think about this, right? Because something I think is broken.
Oh, it's definitely broken. I think we're operating one way as a country and then saying we're operating a different way, or kind of idealizing, a way that we could operate. And the truth is, we know the corporations make a ton of decisions. We know that the trickle down effect doesn't work because it's not meant to work. It was never meant to work. And so I think we're living off of, we're kind of spouting these ideas um, that sound good to some and aren't actually effective. And so by the time it's time to make a change, it's almost too late at that point. And then there has to be drastic change. And we know people don't like change at all, let alone drastic change if it's not something that's directly affecting them. So I think it's definitely, one of those factors. I mean, you mentioned the cost of living compared to the type of work you're doing or where you're living or where you have to live to do a certain type of job. And those are all factors in, kind of how we ended up where we are today, right? It's inflation and just kind of all these things, and throw some greed in there and throw a lack of access to majority of the population, right? And you kind of get to everything that's going on today. And so that's why I appreciated, being in that room, being able to have those conversations, but also appreciated being with all of you who are also there and just hearing everybody's different perspectives and what things were, kind of holding them back or just on front of mind in these different businesses and industries. For us, we've worked locally as well here in Minnesota with both mayors of our twin cities, so St. Paul and Minneapolis, um, trying to get the governor on board. We had the CIO keynote, CIO from Minnesota keynote our community tech fest. So we're kind of making our rounds, but it's still the same thing, right? It's things take time. Government moves slow. Sometimes you have to really break down like impact and why certain things are important. And, I've had to go through that because we talked about innovation earlier, right? And sometimes innovation looks different than what everybody's excited about. Because creating access to people who don't have access is innovation. But also sometimes people don't understand that in order to have innovation, you have to support the vision and not where we are today or where we're at yesterday, right? And so we've seen that as well, where it's like, hey, we're trying to grow this thing. This is how we grow it. And then people are like, well, based on that. And it's like, well, that was because of these variables, pandemic, civil rights movement, or recession or whatever. But this is where we're trying to get to. And in order to get to there, these are the things we need supported. And a lot of times with government or people in general, they don't have that foresight to be like, yeah, this is how we're going to support. And so I think at the end of the day, um, being able to navigate those things, which takes a lot of time and a lot of resiliency because it does get frustrated. I get frustrated all the time. You talked earlier about, founders hearing no's a lot, right? And I don't get a lot of no's. I get a lot of maybes. We'll see. Can you send this over? I'll get back to you. I'm out of office. Like, so that's to me is worse than those, because if you get the no's, at least you can move on, reallocate your energy, right, to find your yes. But when you're like, when the opportunity or potential opportunity is kind of being drawn out, then it's like,
Yeah.
well, you could be wasting your time. And then some things do end up working out, right? But some things don't. And so I think that's another thing that, founders listening, or even a lot of these institutions listening, should consider when you're working with a startup or a small business, is that like we don't have the manpower to like get 4 or 5 months of maybes and we'll sees and we'll, if it's a no. If it really is like we're trying to make this work, cool, let's communicate, see if we can make it work. But even in that, if you're like, we're trying to make this work, say give us a month. So during that month, they can pursue other opportunities and things like that. But, we've had in Minnesota, we have a thing called Minnesota Nice, which is like a passive aggressiveness. And so that's why it's not necessarily a lot of no's, it's a lot of curves and curveballs. stuff because people don't want to say no. Just in case you do become successful, we want to not have told you no
in case.
before. Yeah, but we're not going to do what you want us to do right this second. So being able to navigate that and just making sure like there's still that professionalism, but being direct as well as like, yo, what are we doing here? What's going on? So I
I
think
love a quick no. It's almost as good as a yes because now we can all move on, right? So
that I actually used chat GPT to retone an email that I was getting ready to send because I was just on like, yo, what are we doing? Yes or no? You know what I mean? And so
I need a direct answer.
yeah, and so I was like, I'm actually like I've won awards for writing screenplays and poetry and stuff like that. So I'm a pretty good writer. So I've never used Chat GPT yet where I put something I wrote in it and it gave me something better.
I
But
have one. I have
you
one.
had one. So
Yeah,
I haven't experienced that yet. But what it does help me with is if I am in a bad mood, I'll just have it retone it for me. So
it'll
if I'm
tone it down.
direct, then it'll be like greetings. And it's like, all right, I guess I could have said greetings. You know what I mean? Like make it a little bit more digestible, but it still be like 90% of what I wrote. But yeah, I prefer a quick no. If it's honestly just gonna be a no and there's no way around that, there's no negotiating, just give me the no and we can be friends and move on from that. So, but yeah, we're coming to the, end of our time. Appreciate you being on the show. We had a great conversation. It's different from most of the other conversations, I've had. And that's why, like I said in the beginning, I enjoy doing these because there's different perspectives, but there's many similarities in the things we're trying to overcome and just kind of innovate in and kind of builds that community and camaraderie. So I just want to end with any advice you want to give to, founders when it comes to approaching you or just advice you'd like to give in general.
Yeah, I would say I have some advice for different groups. I would say for anyone listening who was a part of the government that we mentioned, how do we say, let's try to build beyond election cycles and bring and do more of what we did, which is bringing practitioners to the space. To put a bow on that, I would say for funders, that let's try to give that quick no more and also to write the check. But everyone's got to find their tribe on both sides, right? And for founders, I would say, it's tough out here. But if you believe in the vision and, have the luxury of finding some source for innovation in this environment, keep building because with timing, you never know, right? Like timing can go in both directions, right? It can be timing next week, SVB is going to melt down, no one's meeting, no one's wiring, or it can be timing, maybe the next two Fed decisions will be a vote of confidence in the economy that might give people less reservations about how long the capital markets are going to be frozen, right? And
Yeah.
move at this pace. So, but yeah, thank you for having me. It's been an honor to be in conversation with you, whether we're in the Capitol building and storied halls of history or on a Zoom.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's been great having you on as well. And like I said, from the moment we met, we've just had great conversations and great energy. So I'm glad we were able to bring it to this platform and then share it with everyone else who's looking for this information. So thanks for being on the show. And that's a wrap. Stay tuned. This episode is brought to you by Sunrise Banks and Lifetime.